Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Blair Budd, and I'm the director of the One Health Academy. So happy to see so many of you online with us this evening. We're going to go ahead and get started tonight for our March One Health Academy discussion. So just some notes before we go ahead and start. Those that are new, welcome. This is a 1 hour, One Health speaker series. So thank you for joining us. And for those that are returning, thank you so much. We have the go-to webinar platform that is sponsored by the One Health Commission. So just wanted to say thank you so much for their sponsorship, and please consider supporting them in the future. And I also wanted to thank American Society of Microbiology for being our in-person sponsor. So thank you guys for both of those groups. If you're able to support them in any way, please consider to do so. And just some notes about our online hosting, since we're normally in person. We ask that any of our attendees please use the question feature on the GoToWebinar platform. If you have questions throughout the talk, our speaker tonight is open for questions throughout the presentation, so I'll interrupt her if there's anything that folks have questions about as we go through the presentation. And again, there is a chat function, but we would prefer you to use the question function to ask your questions. So please consider doing that. And last but not least, I'd like to make a quick announcement. If folks are unaware, the One Health Act of 2019 has actually been reintroduced in both the Senate and House this past week. So that's exciting news, and I will make sure to leave some links in the chat function for folks who are interested in learning more about that. So fun new updates in regards to Congress activity in One Health, so just so you're aware. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our lovely speaker for tonight. So Dr. Leonie Andrews is joining us to present the What Does Landscape Architecture Have to Do with One Health talk. And Dr. Andrews is a licensed landscape architect with a professional background in ecological restoration, green infrastructure, and community design. She has received a PhD in the built environment with a focus in global health from the University of Washington, and was an NIH Fogarty Global Health Scholar and an LAF National Olmsted Scholar. Leann is currently an assistant professor at Pennsylvania State University and active in the Penn State One Health Group and E+D Ecology plus Design. Leann's work explores the intersection between landscapes, the built environment, and One Health. And she leads landscape design and research projects across both the US and Peru and assesses their impacts on human and ecological health. And she has also co-founded the design activism nonprofit Traction, where she co-directs the Interaction Labs, a transdisciplinary action research program in an amphibious informal settlement community in the Amazon rainforest. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Leonie Andrews. Thank you.
Thank you, Blair. That's a really nice introduction. Going to figure out, there we go. So it's such a delight to be here today. Thank you so much for the invitation. So this is who I am, as you heard. I want to emphasize that I am in this really interesting space between teaching, practice, and research. And in my field of landscape architecture, it is not very common to do research. So while this might be very commonplace for many of you who are listening, this is kind of, I'm a bit of a black sheep in my field. So as I approach the talk today, I'll be putting on those hats of teaching, practice, and research, and you can kind of see how things are laid out here. So so this is what I'm going to talk to you today. 3 parts. I'm going to zip through quite a lot of stuff. So first part is looking at who we are, we as in designers of the built environment, landscape architects, Therian frameworks behind the landscape and the connection to human and animal health, and then some applications, specifically the one, the Interaction Labs project that Blair introduced. I'll run through very quickly what we're exploring there. So who we are. So you all, presumably, if you're here, know this very well, that the One Health definition, and this is specifically from One Health Commission, and it really looks at the intersections between people, animals, plants, and their shared environment. Well, I, as a landscape architect, I am responsible for changing the shared environment of the interconnection pieces between people, animals, and plants. So if you aren't familiar with this terminology, the built environment. So these are physical environments that are manipulated by humans. In my field, I am one of the designers of these, in which we live, work, and play. So anything, basically anything that we are in and among. And there are a whole bunch of different professions in the built environment. I, for one, is a landscape architect. Sometimes I put on a hat as an urban designer. I have a background in ecological restoration, but in general, there's a lot of different professions. I'm talking from the perspective of a landscape architect, though. So if you have no idea what a landscape architect is, or you think you might do, but you're not entirely sure, that's normal. Still trying to convince my family why I have a PhD in what they think is lawn mowing, which I can mow your lawn if you want, but that is not my profession. It is just out of the kindness of my heart. So I did not have a PhD in lawn mowing. And I can also do your background landscape, and many landscape architects do go into residential design, but it is not, it is only one small component of the profession. So landscape architecture, if you aren't familiar, is the making of the environment that meets the aspirations and needs of wildlife and other biological processes on Earth. There's a whole lot of fields within landscape architecture, different types of practices, anywhere from parks to restoration of habitats to streetscapes, plazas, you name it. And it operates at multiple scales. So you really look down to the individual sites, up to the neighborhood scale, up to the regional and global systems. So we really think about how everything is connected in terms of systems, and looking at both space and time, and thinking about this interconnected pieces in our environments that we live, work, and play in. And it's specifically looking at the health of human and non-human habitats. So if you don't know that very knowing guy in the upper left-hand corner, his name is Frederick Law Olmsted, and he's one of the people who has coined the term landscape architect. He's one of the first landscape architects who called himself a landscape architect. And he actually started out as a sanitary engineer and a public health worker. And this is a really interesting way of thinking about the fact that at our roots of our profession was actually public health, and thinking specifically about this. This is Central Park, as you probably recognize it, and it's a good example of how he actually, with a team of people, envisioned how we could create a space in a city. And at that time, it was based upon the miasmatic theory, which is the idea that you got illnesses from the air that you breathed, and which we know now is not entirely accurate. But it was the idea that you could put in these spaces in a city as a place to get away from illness, and a place where not only would you escape disease, that it would promote a healthier environment in terms of disease, but also a place where you could start to mingle with people, that all people would have access to healthy, green play and recreation areas. And so it had a big social and health equity component to it, where people, whether you worked in the factory or in, more in the industrial side of things, or whether you were in the kind of the elite, everyone had access to this park. And it's a really interesting concept of putting in this green space inside of a city, and it's been modeled, quite frankly, all over the world. So this is kind of at our roots. This is what it looked like before, and there is, in terms of a healthy environment to live, work, and play in, this is such a transformation in terms of providing green space for people. And you can see, with all these images, you can see how, creating a space for people, there's all kinds of access to social and mental health and physical activity and all kinds of things that are wrapped up into this park. Biodiversity in the center of the city, places for you to develop as a human, as a child, and to really try and use this space to improve health for all. So that's the roots of who we are. So I'm going to zip through Therian Frameworks. So again, going back to this definition of One Health, specifically looking at the interconnections between people, plants, and their shared environment. And One Health, what I really love about this definition, and it's one of the first ones that I've seen that doesn't specifically look and call out disease, that it's not just disease. I think disease is an incredible component of the framing of One Health, but at least in my work, the reason why I have started to be attracted to One Health is it's very succinctly as a framework sets things up for all of those interconnected pieces between humans, animals, plants, and the environment that we live in. So I teach a class at Penn State. This is actually basically the syllabus of that class. I'm going to try and run through the syllabus in like 10 minutes. So I understand that this is a lot of stuff that I'm throwing at you, but I felt like compelled to be able to have this platform to be able to introduce this, and you of course can dig into this further if there's a topic in your future that you find in your work that you'd like to dig into further. So I'm going to kind of toggle back and forth between theory and frameworks and evidence. So I'll run through these real quick. So many of you may have seen this or not, but this is a diagram that refers to the social determinants of health, or the determinants of health and well-being. And as you can see, the center circle is all the things that you're born with, and it's not drawn by accident as the fact that these circles going outward are larger, and it's the idea that we're born with a certain capacity for health, and there's all these other influential factors that actually allow us to achieve our maximum health capacity. And we're very much connected to also the global ecosystem, the natural environment, and all of these components together allow us to have the health status that we have. And as you see, there's like a circle here that calls out the built environment. I'm going to guess that this diagram was built by someone who was not from the built environment, because I would actually argue that as a landscape architect of the built environment, I would slice right through the center here. And our landscapes influence our lifestyle, our economy, the activities that we can and cannot do, the natural environment that we live in the built environment. And there's very few places, if none, arguably, on our earth that are entirely natural, whatever that means. And then, we're all wrapped up into the global ecosystem, and our landscapes very much impact climate regulation and these larger frameworks there. I also want to call out that many people look at the social determinants of health as an upstream way of thinking about health, which I think is a really great framework to think about it. So you start to address some of the health issues before they become health issues. And a lot of the work in the built environment is looking at this upstream prevention activity, which is incredibly important. But there's also another set of layers that the built environment has the ability to impact, and it's things like healing and palliative care and rehabilitation, and these things that could happen after diseases are also in effect. This is another diagram that's specifically looking at health equity, but it also is a way, as you can see down here at the base of that, is really the environment that you live in and the society that lives within that environment, and it kind of uplifts to support healthy people. And as we all are aware, not everyone is born into a healthy environment or has the ability to participate in that healthy environment. And so this starts to open that conversation up. The Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations, when they made the transition from the Millennium Development Goals to the Sustainable Development Goals, they really had a One Health way of thinking, in that they started to open up into connections between humans, animals, and the environment, and it really expanded upon those goals. So you see here life below water, life on land. Everything here is connected to the act of living in a healthy environment. This is a diagram that shows often the way that One Health is spoken is that you have there's human health and there's animal health, and there's links between those. We're all nestled into the environment, and that environment is shared in that light green circle. And on the right, you'll see is an interpretation of that, of saying, okay, well, if we're all living in this environment, if indeed we improve the environment that we live in, or not improve, the opposite, then the health of humans and the health of animals will actually elevate in the process of doing that, since we're all interconnected. So it is not just important to think about as a way to elevate or a way to target an intervention that you could start to improve human health and ecological health by manipulating the environment, but it's also a cautionary tale that the built environment has such an impact that if we are not paying attention to it, if we are not designing healthy spaces and not thinking about healthy ecosystems, then we have a potential to lower human health and animal health and the interconnected pieces between that. This is another framework, the Millennium, from the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, is looking at ecosystem services, that we all live within this ecosystem that provides these, they have mapped out here 4 buckets of services that nature provides. I like that they say this: nature provides us for free. And so you have provisioning services, regulating services, culture services, and supporting services. And this is really a way to think about the value of ecosystems beyond an economic value. Economic is definitely a piece of it, but we often only talk about the economic when we're trying to think about preventive measures or reactionary measures. And we think to ourselves, oh, what is the cost of that? How much does it really cost to put in a park? Costs a lot. Okay, but what are all the services that come out of it? What are the benefits that we get as humans, and how are we connected to animals in the environment? And then there's also looking specifically at the role of habitat destruction and zoonotic diseases. And I could dig into this a lot further, and have in the last year, and really analyzed coronaviruses and other illnesses such as Lyme disease, and thinking specifically about how our urban environments are expanding. We're really having this rapid urbanization that's happening all over the world, and especially in some cities that are in countries that are developing at a faster rate in the global south, and it is resulting in habitat loss and fragmentation. This diagram here on the top shows the pink are people and their diseases that they carry, or their microbiome that they carry. The yellow are animals, and when you start to expand, the animals are running out of space. There's fragmentation that happens, and you start to have these forced interminglings that might not have happened if the habitat of humans and the habitat of animals were separated. And so with that, you have the potential for disease risk and transmission risk. And it's the same thing with agricultural. We're expanding our agricultural systems. We're intensifying those agricultural systems. So this is an additional, the little blue dots are domestic animals. And trying to think about, now that we have so many animals in one place, we're still expanding and taking up space. And we're starting to have this intermingling connections between and literally sharing the space between humans, animals, wild animals, and domestic animals, and humans. So there's also, thinking beyond the disease, there's the biophilia hypothesis. This is looking at the connection is on a much deeper level of looking at this emotional connection, or this, and this is a hypothesis, this biological connection that we have to seek other life forms, of our attraction to water, our attraction to plants at a very biological level. This is entirely a theory, but it's been tested in research in many different capacities. But it's looking at the nature pyramid as a kind of a spin-off of the food pyramid, and it's really looking at thinking about, in order to achieve our optimal health, that we need exposure to nature on a daily basis, at a neighborhood level, on a weekly basis, at a regional level, at a national level, on a monthly basis, and so forth. Of really looking at the fact that our contact with nature is important to our health and well-being. And this is tied also into the idea of nature deficit disorder. So this is really spurred from this author, Richard Louv, who was digesting quite a lot of research and looking at children who are spending less time outdoors. And this could start to have, and there are 30, 40 years of research behind this, is looking at how child development is changing when with children not having as much time outside, and what are, as a human society and living in these biodiverse environments and interacting with animals and plants, and what is that doing to our children in terms of things like ADHD and behavioral problems. There's also these other pretty cool theories out there called, there's topophilia, solophilia, solastalgia. So this is looking at topophilia is this really strong sense of place. It's hard to describe, but many of us were born in landscapes that, or lived in landscapes that you call home, that really live inside of you, and every place that you visit, you tend to compare to those places. And it's this really deep connection that you have to landscape. And dig into this a little further is this idea of solophilia, which is where you feel very connected to the planet or to the environment, and really looking at your responsibility as a human connected to this larger system. And solastalgia is this very real feeling of desolation or melancholy when you actually see your home environment, your topophilia, deteriorating or being attacked or erased. So you can see to the right images of standing rock that kind of speak to this deeper level of connection to the environment that people have and in response to this place that was being under, in their minds, under attack. So I personally have felt this. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, and there's a lot of mountaintop removal and other very destructive practices that are happening on the landscape level, and you can really you could feel that connection to the landscape whenever you see that happen to a place that you love. Behind all of that, there's plenty of evidence, lots and lots of evidence. These are actually just two papers that I pulled that have summarized this evidence of looking at our access to nature and how that impacts our stress levels, our anxiety levels, and mental health. And it's not just, on a surface level, just seeing grass, which in some components it could be, but it's really looking at biodiverse, rich landscapes. It's looking at the role that animals play, the role that plants play in our mental health. There's also a concept called Defiant Gardens, which comes from this book written by Kenneth Helfland, and it's looking at how gardens are created in extreme social, political, economic, or cultural conditions as a way of coping. And those gardens support wildlife and habitat as well. So it's, again, at this emotional or physiological or immunological response as well, because that's all connected to stress. And he really dug into wartime and thinking about soldiers and gardening, as well as victory gardens of folks who were left. But also, I think probably we're all aware in terms of staying at home and kind of going through the trauma of a global pandemic and the increase of gardening that we've experienced in the past year, and how that impacts both our health and the health of animals and plants around us. There's also this idea of epigenetics, and I say idea, it's like entire field of study. So this is really looking at how our genetic codes or our genetic factors are actually changed through generations, and our grandchildren are impacted by the levels of stress that we experience and the environments that we live in that promote or offer assistance in terms of our health, but also specifically a lot of the studies are out there in terms of stress that are caused by unhealthy environments. And it is really interesting, you know, it's of course a bit of a newer field of science, but in terms of digging into this level of DNA sequencing and all of that, but it's really interesting to think about the landscapes that we live in impact not just us, but it's also our children and our grandchildren. And so this is a photo that was a defining moment in my career, and I will dig into the case study that I'm going to show you. So this is a really great depiction that shows a bit of a summary of all those things that I just talked about. So this is in a slum in Lima, Peru. This family, is actually the specific mother, had this plant that she protected. She does not herself have access to clean water or sanitation. That bowl on the right is a bowl that that she uses for watering her plant. So she has a very little access to clean water, and she uses it to water her plant. And this goes against all of the hierarchy of needs that we're all taught about, where you're supposed to take care of yourself and your basic needs of food and water and things like that. And this woman has taken it upon herself to protect this plant against all costs. And this is in a desert and very, very harsh environment. And makes you think, why would you put forth that energy to be able to take care of this plant? And not only is it a plant, but it's a flowering plant. It is not producing food, and she is experiencing extreme food insecurity. And so it makes you wonder this very real interconnection between humans and plants and animals as well, and how it impacts choices that we make as individuals. And you know, some of these softer, squishier science is actually really impactful to how people interact with their environment and the choices that they make. So kind of zip through that was my entire semester's class, if any of my students are watching in 10 minutes. So application. So this is a program that I've had the honor to direct along with my colleague Coco Alarcon, who is a Peruvian. So it's called the Interaction Labs. It's in Iquitos, Peru. And it's specifically working with an informal, what we call amphibious community. I'll explain that in a minute. And looking at, it's a slum community, very, very harsh environment, very, very harsh human and ecological health issues that they're experiencing. And we are exploring, if we improve the environment, how could human health and animal health be improved at the same time? And we're doing a longitudinal study where we put in an intervention, a landscape intervention every year, and we track the health of the people and the health of, in a very surface level, we're trying to get to a deeper level, but for right now, health of the animals in terms of biodiversity over time. And we're really looking at how could a landscape interventions actually be health interventions. So this is just a diagram to show you what we're doing. The purple is the assessment. So we're doing research and evaluation before and after an intervention. So we just kind of track it over time. We do an intervention each year, and we measure before and after, and look at it specifically in terms of that project, but then also longitudinally. I'll say it's not done. So this is preliminary results, but I'll show you. It's an active program. Lots of partners involved. I won't go into this, but it is a big collaboration effort between institutions as well as disciplines. It's not just the landscape architecture project. I'm one small piece into this larger transdisciplinary effort, and the framework that we often talk about is transdisciplinary action research, where you're doing something and researching the impact on that community. This is again, not going into this, but the blue are Peruvians, the gray are folks from the US, and just to show you, is an equal partnership from Peru and the US. So zipping through the context, Iquitos is the location. It's in the Amazon rainforest, which is that giant green outline there in South America. And Iquitos is a city. It's an actual city. There are, I believe it's 34 million people who live in the Amazon rainforest. If you aren't familiar, Iquitos has about 500,000 people in it, so it's not a small city. It's a city, and that and it's right along the Amazon River, and there's a river on either side that really are floodplain tributaries of the Amazon River. And this city is really interesting. So this is what the city looks like. It is a city. But on the edge of the city are these is the floodplain, and there's about 30 to 40,000 people in this particular community, but in general, it's an estimated 90,000 people live in these amphibious communities. So these are communities that live in the floodplain, and the water goes up and down in the high river season and the low river season. And they are floating or on stilts. In this particular community that I'm working with, it's called Clavrito, and they are floating. So it's this really interesting space. As you can see on the right, you've got all of these ecological forces that are happening. Of course, as we all know, the Amazon rainforest has just the highest biodiversity in the world. And so you have all of this really interesting influence there. And then you have the extreme urban system of the city to your left. And then you have this space here that is just an influx of influential factors between those spaces. And because it is an informal settlement, the folks that are living here are experiencing extreme health issues. This is just to describe to you, this area here is a soccer field here. This is the same spot in the low river season and the high river season. And the water goes up and down, and these houses are floating, hence the amphibious. They spend half their life on dry land and the other half in the water. And as informal settlements are, they, extreme, no access to clean water, sanitation, a kind of pretty extreme health situation that they're experiencing. We have exposure to things like parasites and injuries, diarrhea, food insecurity, and of course, mental health and depression. So I won't go through all of the statistics here, but there's about 53 houses, and about 281 people, and about 240 domestic animals, all living in this one area, along with thousands of wild animals. So we have identified, so that means there's probably way more than that, 116 species of birds. So the project itself starts as a participatory project, which means that we actually work with the community very, very closely. We identify their needs through a series of workshops, what their desires are, what it is that they would like to improve. Through that process, we do a whole bunch of workshops to try and help identify the issues that are important to them. We pair that with our team of scientists who go out and do different measures with using surveys and field measures to understand the health risks and health realities that are in this particular community. And we pair these, environmental health, human health, ecological health, kind of all into the mix. We work with them as they actually design the spaces that we're doing. We are offering ourselves as design professionals, and we are facilitating their ideas and opinions about what it is that they would want. They also participate in the act of constructing the project. And so this is really important because when you look at the outcomes, which I'll show you in a bit, it's not just the product, the landscape that pops up on the other side, but it's also the process of working in this landscape together as a community. And I just love this picture. It's my favorite pictures. So this is a granddaughter watching her grandfather and her great-grandfather construct a garden outside of their home. And you can imagine what that's like to have to watch your grandfather take charge of his environment, and really create something, and what that does to you as a child to be able to see that growing up. We also pair in workshops in terms of learning how to maintain and learning about the benefits of these landscapes. So it's not a research hands-off type atmosphere. So it's important to note with transdisciplinary action research, we feel a responsibility to tell the residents of the impacts of the projects, and so that they can make smart choices about their health for their future. And so the image on the left is actually a workshop with mostly for adults, although we did have some kids that just popped up, which happens from time to time. So it's looking at how to demonstrate maintenance practices for caring for the landscapes. And on the right, we're actually using theater and the performance art through as a way to describe to the kids so they understand some of the science behind it, the things that we have found. So this is a diagram again explaining the different projects. So this is the pink is what we did the first year, or the yellow is the first year, pink is the second year, and this kind of blue and green is the third year of our program. So we anticipate continuing to work here for several more years. But here's some pictures of before and after. So this is a hillside that leads into the community. This happens to be taken during the dry season. And this is what it looked like after. So this is a hillside park. It was the first phase of a hillside park. And you can see we put in concrete stairs with a handrail, and there's a terrace set of rain gardens that lead down. It previously was a trash dump. So one of the unfortunate things about slums all over the world, including informal communities. I live in Seattle currently, and we have an extreme issue with homelessness. And I will tell you, people throw garbage on our homeless all the time. So this is not just a Peru situation, but they get people dumped from the upper part of the city, actually dump their trash on the community itself, thinking that they don't really care about their environment, which is entirely not true. But it's also promoting this trash creates containers for mosquito and habitat for mosquitoes, which in Iquitos and other places along the equator is a really serious problem for things like dengue and Zika and other types of diseases that are related to mosquito. And so we were looking at how could we remove the trash, but also put in beautiful plants in order to promote not dumping trash on there in the future. And that was kind of our mitigation strategy there for lots of different reasons. This wasn't just a garden, it was also looking at green infrastructure technologies and how you can infiltrate the water and use plants and phytoremediation practices where the plants actually soak up some contamination and start to break down some contaminants through cleaning the water systems. And this is really important because at the bottom, you can see this little pipe down here is where they tap their water to drink. And so before they were drinking basically water that had filtered through this landfill, and we use this to kind of clean the water in the process of having this beautification and injury reduction effort through the concrete stairs. This is more pictures of what this looks like. And you can see this is actually, I think 2 years later where the plants have started to grow up and transform the place. So on the other side of the park, there's this spot that quite frankly is a drug dealing and mafia spot. So it has a pretty high crime area. And so the community wanted to transform this by be able to, there's a bit of a problem again with folks who live informally with invisibility. And so they wanted to show that they are here, that they are very proud of their community. And they also wanted to portray this deep connection that they had to plants and animals in the community because they are actually, I didn't say this in the beginning, but they're indigenous migrants. Many of them are first generation or second generation indigenous migrants. And so the community painted this mural themselves, but each of them were invited to place a fingerprint on or a handprint in some cases, because people don't always listen to when you have a handprint or fingerprint. And as a way to just say, hey, we are here and we are part of this project. And so this began to transform from a crime spot to a selfie spot. So we actually got folks that were tourists started to come over to this area that previously was very scary and was in front of a slum community, and they started to take pictures and And that's important because it becomes more eyes on the street, where the crime started probably was still occurring, but it wasn't occurring in a way that was perceived as a threat to the community, as they would have to walk through it another way down into their community. And so it's just to show you a little bit more of the context and how it's wrapped into this other larger park below. And you can actually see this heliconia flower up here is a symbol of indigenous culture, but also the city. And you can see this is actually the heliconia flower here. So there's this connection down to the landscape in the community below. And this is just more pictures of what this looks like, going down into the floating community. And the third year, we were looking specifically at along this waterfront park, putting in this amphitheater and pavilion. It was basically a community center for them. And so this was really important so that they had a place to gather. So it has, you know, maybe not so much an ecological component, but it was a way to have them have a place where they could celebrate things. They have these cleaning parties every Sunday where they would go out as a group and clean the trash in the community, which of course has an ecological and human and animal health component to it. And so this was a place where they could go afterwards and celebrate and make it fun to clean up trash. Which is hard to do, I'll say. It also was a way to draw people from the upper part of the city down into the community, where you could start to think about all these stigma and prejudice against people who live in informal settlements, and how you could address things like future trash being thrown on them, or just stereotypes and that are prevalent in the city. And in all cities, I'll say that that's like definitely an issue. Then there was a household garden component where the community actually designed their own gardens. We work with them as designers. Some of them designs are a little odd in my vision, but it's what they designed. So this is what they came out, and we helped them envision what this was. I love this one here. There's and this had nothing to do with the designers. This came out of their own fruition. So this says, savage is not who lives in the jungle, savage is who destroys it. We only have one planet, take care of it. And so that's really interesting to have this, you know, we have the garden that is starts to promote pollinators in this urban area, and it's producing food and medicine and habitat, but it's also a part of their identity. It's also part of who they are, and they felt compelled to be able to write this poem on the outside of their garden as a way to communicate to the larger city, hey, we are here, we are connected to our plants and our animals and our environment, and we are very proud of that. And all this artwork came out of this project as well. Again, had nothing to do with us designers. It was just a way for them to express their identity. So this woman painted this beautiful mural. I love it. This is her floating house on the right and her floating garden here. I would love to sit down and kind of pick this apart at some point. The garden is like twice the size of her house, and interestingly, she has no neighbors in her painting, which I think is really interesting. But there's like a really cool thing that's happening here where you can start to see the level of detail of this tree, and it's actually ecologically anatomically correct, like in terms of like the way that understanding plants and animals, and really, a lot of people, draw the like fluffy trees. These are people who really are attached to their environment in a way that I can only begin to try and understand in terms of indigenous knowledge and that ecological knowledge that is incredibly valuable to us worldwide. Our medicines many of them come from the Amazon rainforest. I think it's something like 54% of our cancer, potential cancer medicines or treatments are actually come from the Amazon rainforest. And a lot of that spurs from indigenous knowledge that we're then kind of revealing as scientists. So this is what the gardens look like as they grow up. Again, they're producing food for this very food insecure group of folks, as well as, again, going back to that picture that I showed you earlier, things like beauty and flowers. For them, they had free reign choice of plants. We could put anything that they wanted in, and a lot of them chose plants that they thought were beautiful, because that for them was part of, they understood on a deep level the impact that a flower has on their life, and not just in terms of food security, or there's medicinal plants that, again, with the indigenous roots that they use in addressing a lot of their illnesses. And we specifically targeted gastrointestinal illnesses because of our knowledge through our scientific studies, but also looking at plants and how, you reduce your stress levels as a person, you also increase your ability to recover from illness and disease. And you can see some of these are what they look like over time as they've expanded upon their gardens well beyond after our project has finished. So really, really zipping through the results that we found so far. In terms of methods, I won't go into this. We use a lot of different methods in terms of things all the way from surveys to samples and field measures. And so we were looking at before and after in terms of trash, and you can see here that there was quite a lot of trash before, and after the installation of the plants, we still collected a little bit of trash, but as the plants grew up, the amount of trash that was accumulating had gone down. So in terms of success levels, at least for that first year, it definitely reduced trash dumping and mosquito reservoirs. Increasing biodiversity as well. So by putting in these plants that there was, especially with pollinators, were able to be improved, which, as we all know, is linked to our food systems as well. So I'm sure had a huge impact on the gardens and the productivity of those gardens that were in the community as well. And just zipping through some of the different species that we found in our studies. And in terms of beauty, pride, sense of place, again, this is incredibly important when we talk about our health and our connection between humans, animals, and ecosystems. So you can see that over just 1 year, before 27% thought their community was beautiful, but after 2/3 were very proud of the place that they had lived. And people always ask me, okay, what percent are growing different types of plants? And as you can see across, it's pretty evenly split. That folks, when they had full choice of plants, they chose food, medicine, and flowering plants across the board in their gardens. Food insecurity also decreased. So those who were severely food insecure, everyone kind of moved down a level when we actually dig into the data, which I didn't include those charts there. But you can see here in terms of the severe food insecurity. So we took a measure without an intervention. You can see it's pretty much the same. Then it dipped down quite a lot. There was a huge food increase of cost in the city, so it actually rose. And then we put in another intervention and it started to decrease again. Anemia rates have also gone down. We didn't do anything to parasites. Parasitic infection happened pretty much consistently at 80%. Medicine insecurity before and after. Again, we asked folks if they felt they had access to medicine, and because of the medicinal plants we were able to provide in the landscapes, we were able to reduce that, and so folks were able to have access to medicinal plants. Depression also decreased quite a bit, depressive symptoms, and again with you can see no intervention as not a whole lot of change. When you put the intervention in, it quite changed. That increase in food price had a big impact on their depressive levels, so it did go back up quite a bit. But then after the second intervention, it went down again. Anxiety as well. We measured anxiety, but only the second year. Social well-being, relationships were strengthened in the process of doing this. Injuries was the surprising biggest component, and for these folks, having less injuries meant less exposure to infections after falls were a really big deal. With biodiversity in the Amazon rainforest means biodiversity of bacteria as well. So we also looked specifically, I won't go into this because it'll take quite a lot of time to go into this, but we looked at microbiome transfers and how the exposure to your environment actually is connected to your oral microbiome, your gut microbiome, and especially in terms of yeah, that transition between things. We look specifically at humans, although I'd love to dig into animals as well at one point in the future. But we also looked at the role of plants, and this is floating vegetation. To the left, this is a E. coli test, and you can see on the right side all the little purple dots. That's E. coli in this particular location on the right, and on the left, where there are plants, it's actually cleaning, or there's mechanisms behind that, but removing the E. coli from the water, so the top level of the water is actually a lot cleaner, 97 up to 9% cleaner in terms of coliforms and E. coli in the water. And we did dove into the mechanisms that I won't go into, and really just showing you what, the gut microbiome, all the different species that we discovered in the gut, in the mouth, and in the environment, and we're still analyzing those results. And in terms of, so we always ask ourselves, okay, so we got the science and this is starting to be figured out. Again, it's a preliminary study in our minds because we're looking at things longitudinally. However, it's also important to see if the people themselves are happy with what is going on, and it's not just the science before and after. So we did what's called a design impact assessment as well. And you can see the blue are people that thought that their lives in different ways were made much better than before, or better than before. So across the board, folks were feeling like it was a positive impact on their lives. So leaving you with, again, this definition of One Health. So really looking at what are the interconnections between people, animal, plants, and their environment. And that is what I have. I think we have a few minutes left if we have any questions or comments.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Andrews, for your talk and for such a great presentation. Thank you for sharing your contact information. If we were in person here in DC, I would be handing you a flag flown over the Capitol as a token of our gratitude. So please feel free to provide your address so I can send that to you to say thank you on behalf of our One Health community here. So thank you so much. And I know we're short on time, you guys. So just to encourage folks to leave whatever questions you have in the question box I can get to until we sign off at 8. And thanks for those that have provided some links and additional information. I put those in the chat, but we do have one right now. We have a question, so I'm going to go ahead and start with that. Comment is great talk. I was interested to see the connection to medicinal plants focused on GI disease, particularly since environmental enteropathy is an established issue among younger children in acute dose. This is like a MALED study, potentially partially driven by small-scale animal rearing in households and E. coli contamination. Was there any interest by communities in plants, food or medicinal, for animal consumption, or attention to toxicity of plants for animal consumption? Any households with both gardens and chickens, or apologies, it's ... there. So go ahead and answer that one, Dr. Andrews, and I'll try to get to the rest of the question.
So let me see if I can understand the question. So is looking at plants as a mitigation for like animals specifically, or?
Okay, I got to the rest of the question. Was there any interest by communities in plants, either food or medicinal, for animal consumption, or attention to toxicity of plants for animal consumption? Any households, both gardens or chickens, or other domestic livestock?
Oh, I mean, that's a really interesting. So no, but we didn't ask them. So I hadn't asked them, do you want plants for your animals? So there, as you might have recalled, there were about 280 people living there. There's about 240 domestic animals as well. And that's a great idea for like another layer to our project. I have aspirations of the domestic animal component really matching the human health component and the biodiversity component. We haven't had a chance to really bring that up to the level that I'd like. But that's really interesting. I will say there's one, so the aquatic plants that I showed you, I guess I could go back to the slide real quick, that we're studying that are increasing or decreasing E. coli in the area. There's one plant here called putu putu, which I believe is water lettuce in English, and it's native here. And they actually use that, they harvest that and use it to feed their chickens. So that's like one way of thinking about it. And through our project, since we again have this belief that we should be telling them what the results are, so we've told them that that the water is being cleaned in these certain areas. So we would recommend you don't drink this water, but if you need to like bathe your kid or do something in the water, part the plants away, and that clean water is more clean right there. So it actually resulted in folks really designing their environment and the infrastructure to support more of this putu, which in turn allowed for more food for their chickens as well. So it kind of had a dual purpose there. And I'd love to dig into that further. I haven't really analyzed that, but that's a really good idea. Thanks for that.
Great. All right, we'll go ahead and move on. Thank you very much for a fascinating presentation. I teach medical students in Australia and would love to share some of this material with them and challenge them to think deeply about it. So I'm wondering if you'll be making a PDF of your slides available. Many thanks for witness.
Yeah, I could totally do that. I believe we're also recorded, right? So
yes, correct. So that's also a resource.
Yeah, which probably is a little better than my like kind of haphazard notes, but I'm happy to share. Cool, Australia, hello.
All right, our next question is, thank you for an incredibly important presentation. What medicinal plants did you plant, and how do we get more of this work spread globally?
Oh, I would love to have more. I think all of you tell people that you should be working with landscape architects. That's how you get it. We're a little known profession, and we would love to work with you. Actually, in fact, we just redefined our profession. We did this thing we called the New Landscape Declaration, where we sat down and we committed ourselves to solving some of these larger global issues of, global disease, global species loss as a profession. But, we can't do this on our own. I'm not trained in gastrointestinal illness mechanisms. So I need to partner with all of you. So I would love to work with all of you. So that's to answer that question. And in terms of the plant selection was a partnership between the community. There's a lot of indigenous knowledge there. And there was this research organization called IMET, the Institute of Traditional Medicine in Iquitos, that has been taking some of these traditional kind of tales of solving a lot of these problems and testing them in the laboratory on understanding the mechanisms, how the quantity of plant that you should be consuming to address a certain illness, what part of the plant, what does that plant soil does that plant need to grow in order to give that medicinal quality. And we paired their research with what the folks were saying. Oh, this totally solves, like, addresses malaria, or oh, like when you have a stomach ache, you should make a tea out of this. And we paired that together, and we used the overlaps there are the plants that we put into our gardens.
That's awesome. And there was a follow-up to that question from Dr. Khan. How do you publish your results yet?
I have started to. I'm definitely in that uncomfortable boat of needing to hurry up and get things out to publish, but I do have a couple publications out, and my team of interdisciplinary people are in the process of doing the preliminary results, publishing that out. So I stay tuned. Probably in the next year, I'll have a whole bunch of stuff, but I do have a couple of the larger frameworks already published that I'm happy to share somewhere if folks want them.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Andrews. I'm going to read the last comment that we have right now and encourage folks while I'm doing that to check out the chat function that has some really great resources that Dr. Cheryl Stroud, who's with us, did share. So the last comment was, thank you, Dr. Andrews, very interesting talk. I love to hear plants included in our discussions, and pollinators, so important. So really amazing presentation. The visuals were awesome. Just a reminder to folks that if you'd like to reach out to Dr. Andrews, her information's on the slide that's currently being shared. And to Dr. Andrews, thank you so much for your time, and feel free to share anything with us that we can share with the community based on future accomplishments and progress. And we're always here if you're ever in DC locally for a visit. I know Pennsylvania is not too far. But yes, thank you. Thank you so much. And yeah, if you have any final thoughts or comments before we wrap up tonight.
No, thank you for the platform. I really, it's just such a delight to be able to talk to all of you. And again, if you're thinking about projects, we have a whole profession who's waiting. I'd love to work with you. So if you need help wherever you are, if you're in Australia or you're in Massachusetts, you're welcome to shoot me an email and I could connect you to landscape architects who would love to partner with you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Andrews, and to everyone, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This will be recorded. Again, contact information is on the slide, lots of resources in the chat feature and also in the question feature if you hit a certain link, file link. So encourage you to look at all of that, and we will follow up with some email outreach for our future speakers. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and stay healthy and safe wherever you are, and we'll see you again soon. So thank you again, Dr. Andrews, and everyone have a great night. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.